Okay, I think we'll just ease into it, get started here, and then we'll bring back up the slideshow for everyone. But thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Nick Custer. I work in the Office of Economic Development, and as always, we're grateful to have you join us today as we partner with the College of Arts and Sciences to host this wonderful series. As well as we want to thank our sponsors, the Michigan Economic Development Corporation and 100K Ideas for helping to fund our long-term series. If you don't know, the Office of Economic Development's Innovation Incubator serves students and community members by providing no-cost business counseling and professional development webinars and discussions every month like this one to increase the knowledge and confidence of our stakeholders. I'll put a link in the chat for anyone who's interested in learning more about our incubation services. And just a little housekeeping before we get started. We ask that you guys keep your mics on mute today, as I've said, and that you put any questions you have in the chat. Time will be reserved at the end of the session so we can answer all of your questions. Today's session will also be recorded and available online after this week. With that, I'd now like to introduce Associate Dean for the College of Arts and Sciences, Mr. Roy Barnes.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you everybody for joining us. It's hard to believe that this is our fourth year doing this series. And given that it's the fourth year, it actually corresponds to a topic that I've been sort of thinking about thinking about the past few years about the fourth industrial revolution. And so it was a nice convergence that we'd have the fourth year of the series and the fourth industrial revolution. And so I also want to mention and just sort of contextualize this series. It's entitled Liberal Learning and Entrepreneurialism. And a lot of people might initially maybe scratch their head and ask, well, why are we talking about liberal learning and entrepreneurialism? And I just want to give you a quick context. About 5 or 6 years ago, something like that, Nick, about 5 or 6 years, the Ferris wheel in downtown Flint was literally under construction. And we were walking around in our hard hats and looking at it. And David Ollila was talking about entrepreneurialism and what they're going to do there. And he was talking about the need to take risks and the need for creative thought and critical thinking and communication about your ideas. And as I was listening to him, I thought to myself, he is talking about liberal learning. He's talking about the core things that College of Arts and Sciences build into their curriculum for their students. And so I thought, wow, let's put them together in this series. And so this year, as I mentioned, we're talking about the fourth industrial revolution and Industry 4.0 and how the challenges and really what it means for society and higher education and our students. So with that brief introduction to sort of the series and our topic today, I want to do a couple quick introductions. We have some we have a couple of great guests who I'm very thankful and grateful that they decided to or agreed to participate. So the first, I'd like to introduce Susan Gano-Phillips, who of course is the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences and Professor of Psychology. In addition to her major accomplishments and leadership within the College of Arts and Sciences, Susan has been the director of the Thompson Center for Learning and Teaching, as well as the co-chair for the General Education Design Committee 12 years ago or so, something like that. She also held a Fulbright fellowship and worked in Hong Kong for a year to help transition their technical degree programs into a liberal arts-based curricula. So in many ways, Susan brings years of experience in higher education and liberal learning to the conversation, and I'm so pleased that she agreed to participate today. Secondly, I'd like to introduce Cynthia Hutchison, who is the Vice President for Automation Alley. Automation Alley is a 4.0 knowledge center, Industry 4.0 knowledge center, and a World Economic Forum advanced manufacturing hub. Cynthia oversees program development, operations, sales, marketing, government affairs for Automation Alley's over 1,100 partner companies in the areas of technology and manufacturing. Cynthia is also an Industry 4.0 thought leader and serves as Automation Alley's liaison between the Automation Alley and the World Economic Forum. And in fact, I believe, Cynthia, it's this July, you will be traveling to the World Economic Forum for an extended period of stay. So I'm very grateful for her to take time out of her schedule before she goes off to Switzerland, I guess. So
Thank you for having me.
with that, with those introductions, let's begin. And I'd like to start off with Cynthia. As an Industry 4.0 thought leader, how do you see the fourth industrial revolution affecting our society? And then maybe Susan, you can talk about your vision of the College of Arts and Sciences in light of Cynthia's remarks.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Roy and Susan. I'm really delighted to be part of this day for the LLE. First of all, Industry 4.0 is going to impact absolutely every profession and every aspect of our lives. I think we've seen an acceleration of what Industry 4.0 is going to do to us through the pandemic, because we have been forced to use technology. Heaven forbid, even my 80-something-year-old parents have been forced to use technology in a way they had never anticipated. But each job, all the way from agriculture to aerospace and automotive and anything you can think of in between, every industry is going to be impacted. It's an acceleration of transformation. So where we used to have a long lead time to learn something new and adapt to a new experience, we now have it thrust at us, and changing how we do business every day. In many ways, it creates anxiety for some people because it feels somewhat threatening to the today that they know, but it also opens up some doors and some exciting new opportunities for people who are willing to embrace change and become constant learners. And we'll be talking about that throughout the day today, but it's a really critical time for us. So I think that's an important element, is to understand that there's no industry that will be unscathed by this transformation. And rather than unscathed, we should look at that won't be benefited, because this transformation will ultimately end up being beneficial. And again, I think we've seen much of that during the difficulties we've had with COVID. The other thing is, one example I have from Automation Alley is we have put together a 300 printer network, 3D printers. We have the largest distributed network in the world of 3D printers. What's important about that and truly transformational is these are not at big companies. They're at small to mid-sized companies who in the past would have had to be part of something and maybe be working at a factory. So now the manufacturing success of a factory is in the hands of 300 dispersed people. So it's essentially a democratization of manufacturing, a democratization of opportunity to make money, where small businesses who couldn't have gotten part of a huge contract can now get 1/300 of that huge contract. It's an exciting example of the revolution. This is one of many. So I think that's what lies ahead, is creative thinking and opportunities to see things in a different way.
Thank
Well,
you.
Cynthia, it certainly does not escape me that when you talk about every industry being impacted by fourth industrial revolution, that higher education is one of those entities who will see tremendous change in the next few years. And so when I think about the vision for our college, I think both about the experiences we provide to our students, and certainly learning to be adaptive, learning that change is an inevitable and actually desired and helpful part of life, and that we have to be ever present, ever ready for that change to occur. We can't prepare students, we can't prepare graduates for the world that we're going to have in 15 years because we're still imagining what that's going to be. We haven't even figured out a lot of what we're going to be doing 15 years from now. So I think it is about developing aptitudes for learning, for lifelong learning, and I think it's about focusing on the things that humans are uniquely prepared to do, that AI and robots and other kinds of things won't be able to replace humans in doing. And so that's the kind of critical thinking, creative thinking, the innovation that you described in terms of the distributed model of 3D printing. It's problem solving, it's leadership, and it's learning to be resilient in the face of unexpected change, which is undoubtedly going to come along the way. I think the other thing that the college needs to do is help our students become more self-directed and self-determined learners and actors and leaders and collaborators. It goes way beyond knowledge is, and it moves into the space of how one approaches their engagement with the world around them. They're not simply passive recipients of information or assignments, but rather they're the people who are creating the new workplaces in which they're going to find themselves.
No, thank you very much. Yeah, Cynthia, one thing that you mentioned that I find really interesting was how Industry 4.0 or Fourth Industrial Revolution is going to disperse opportunities. I think a lot of people think about the Fourth Industrial Revolution and think about Big Brother, but in fact, there's actually opportunities in your example that we haven't, that we don't normally think about. So that's pretty interesting. So in the previous two talks, sort of the arc of the LLE 4.0 series really has been one of where we first introduced the concept of the Fourth Industrial Revolution in Industry 4.0 with the chancellor. And then secondly, we had the provost and the dean of the College of Innovation and Technology talk a little bit more about its application to the new CIT at the university. But today, as we've sort of indicated, we want to shift the focus a little bit of our conversation to be about arts and sciences students and students in general. So from both of your perspectives, what are the most pertinent aspects of this transformation? And Susan sort of already touched on some of them, but what do you see in terms of, if we focus on students and the challenges facing them, what should we be focusing on and maybe doubling down on?
Well, thanks, Roy. I think that's a huge question. We could probably spend the next few weeks, let alone the next hour, talking about this.
Yeah.
But, I think when we start in talking about arts and sciences, we have to start with a basic overview of what this industrial revolution is, this fourth industrial revolution. And I think that, for folks who are not particularly technologically inclined, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around what it is. So if I provide maybe a simple definition and then talk about its impact, maybe that will be helpful. So, one of the ways I've looked at this is thinking about the fusion of different kinds of technologies, artificial intelligence, robotics, the Internet of Things. We've heard this in our previous sessions, 3D printing, as Cynthia has mentioned, genetic engineering, quantum computing. I mean, these are topics that maybe some of us don't feel all that familiar with as liberal arts and sciences faculty or students. But the combination of these things is going to transform the way that we work in the world. And one of the things that I've noticed about this fourth industrial revolution is that it's all around us and it's already impacting us, but it's so pervasive we hardly know it. It's the personal assistants on our cell phones that can do voice to text. It is the things we have in our home that are connected and can tell us when it's time to buy something else from the front of our refrigerator. It's those kinds of technologies. So when I think in the context of the college, I think of it at two levels. One is, how should or will it affect students' experiences as university students? And then secondly, what do we need to do about that in engaging with students? So in terms of how it's going to affect student experiences, higher education, I think, is in some ways maybe a little bit behind some other areas of society in terms of adapting to these technologies. But it's going to be things like thinking deeply through the student experience and how to enhance it through technological innovation. Chatbots who use machine learning and AI technologies will improve students' experiences. They'll have more immediacy to the kinds of answers that they're seeking for various things. There'll be software systems that there are already software systems not widely utilized, but that grade papers, full-length essays that are written for various kinds of courses can be graded by artificial intelligence. What does it mean that grading could be done by artificial intelligence? Well, one of the things it means is that faculty's roles are going to shift, right? If faculty don't spend time in certain activities, they will be freed to spend time in other activities. In the ways that we recruit students and advise students, technologies are already changing things. We never used to text students. We didn't have automated systems that responded to students or notified or reminded students at various points in time to do certain things to make sure that they were ready to graduate, et cetera. So all of those are going to change, all the way down to our facilities. There are systems in place that monitor building systems and know when things are going to break or when they have broken, so that we don't have large expenditures unexpectedly. So on the experience side, I think it's going to be largely driven by the technological innovations that improve students' customer relationships with universities. It's sort of the Amazon version of university is what we're going to see. Universities are going to know us as people. When we start visiting websites, they're going to give us the content we want that's specific to ourselves, and that will pervade through our activities. But probably more interestingly, on the what do we need to do with students to prepare them for the world that they're entering in work? I think it is often referred to as, soft skills. I don't really like that language. I'd like to call them human skills, but it is about preparing students with the fundamental engagement tools that will allow them to adapt in workplaces. So communication skills, emotional intelligence in working with diverse teams, leadership skills, the ability to influence and persuade others, be resilient when something unexpected happens, critical thinking. Those are the things that we perhaps need to make more explicit and front load in ways in our curriculum, so that students enter the workforce ready to take on the challenges and the experiences that are already there.
Yeah, thank you.
Susan, you brought up such a good point when you first mentioned that, as all industries are going to be impacted, clearly higher education is one of them. All education is. One of the things that I really like about your approach to is, doesn't sound threatening at all. It sounds like it's an opportunity. We talk to manufacturers about that all the time, that adding technology to your factory is not going to take away jobs. It's going to free up some time for more brain powered jobs, and take that manual things like you alluded to, grading papers, alleviate some of the time you need to do for that now, and give the instructor more time to be a true mentor and guide to a student. And I think that will impact long-term some of those critical thinking skills that we know students need to have. And while they learn to think very critically in context of an academic assignment, perhaps changing that into the non-academic world and learning to be agile in their response to things, using that emotional intelligence combined with the academic learning to pivot and make good decisions that make them present themselves to their very best. What's going to happen for students is that they will become lifetime learners. And now, I believe more than ever, the instructors need to really own the role of becoming lifetime influencers. I think there's a great opportunity for strong academic leaders to take on that lifetime influencer role. I think that, your students who hear this might not like this, but I think they're going to be with you forever. I think a student who has a good experience at an academic institution will be returning for upskilling, reskilling, pivoting, adding a credential, adding just a little piece of learning as needed, as well as maintaining their general knowledge set. So I think that there's an opportunity for continual learning. But to your point, teaching students to be good learners and to be interested in learning and to really use discernment. You've used the word discernment a couple of times, and it's really an important one. I think we saw a lot of that in the last year, even in terms of, again, how we responded to COVID, how we responded to particular pieces of news. So I look at this as an interesting time for learners to become very different about how they learn. And the academic institutions who are going to really thrive in the next generation are going to be the ones who learn how to be influencers and teach discernment rather than just throwing knowledge out. Knowledge is easy to acquire, but putting it in context is really the challenge. And that's where we need great academic thinkers. There's a new World Economic Forum paper talking about the skills gap for young people in the age of COVID-19, and it emphasizes the soft skills as well. But I think that the problem solving and entrepreneurial thinking are going to be the big things that we see in that. Learning to participate in a rapidly evolving world is it empowers the student, it empowers the young learner, and then learning to disseminate between what's good information and what's just too much data is an important thing. I think if we can teach one thing, it would always be discernment. And I'm hoping to see more of that come out of the academic institutions. But I think well, I know we're going to talk later a little bit more about looking at what that really looks like, the transition between an academic setting and a business setting, and how you can translate those skills into functional improvement.
Yeah, the problem is not access to information. The problem is making sense of all that information. And I heard one person say, faculty, can't be as smart as can't be as good at retaining facts or information as Google. It's just, not possible. But what we do have is the creative, the discernment, the critical thinking to sort of organize and sort through all that stuff. So yeah, that's how we're going to be robot proof, I suppose. I've often heard employers say that they can easily train their new employees on the software that's company specific or the manufacturing process that's in place there, but they feel like they're less prepared to teach their incoming employees the critical thinking skills or the creativity or the communication skills, the writing skills, the human skills, as Susan said, the soft skills as often referred to in the literature. So this is great. I've always wanted to make sure I asked somebody who's in the know. From your experience, Cynthia, does that ring true? Is that what you are hearing from employers as well? That, yeah, it's these things that are done in colleges and universities that is the tough thing and that we need them for.
Absolutely. This is what we're hearing from corporations across the board. What industry is saying is that they want people who have, and they all use the term soft skills. I know, Susan, we need a better word for it. They need this good interpersonal skills. They're looking for emotional intelligence. They're looking for the ability to figure out what to do with some independence, as opposed to being task driven. We're no longer a task driven society. And again, robots are doing tasks. We need to be doing the thinking and the strategizing. So if you almost look at it as tactical versus strategic, this is an opportunity for most of us to elevate into the higher strategic thinking. And yet knowing that that's not going to be everybody's path. But I think when you really look at the challenges that the employers are seeing, it's perhaps a bit of a misunderstanding about what academic institutions provide and what corporations need to provide, and where do we meet in the middle, because that middle piece is the challenge. I had somebody call me about a job opening we have, and this is an example of that transition from an academic setting into a very practical setting. It's a very simple example, but somebody called me and asked if I would entertain her resume for an opportunity. I said, sure. And I offered to actually hand deliver it to the person who was going to be doing the hiring. The person then sent me the resume out of a different email, not her own email. So that's a simple error. If you happen to be using, I've had people on Zoom calls with their son's name under their picture because they're using their son's access code, but when you do that kind of thing for a job, it makes you look less than you are. It takes away, it shows to me, it's a glaring lack of discernment. It's a glaring lack of recognition of that critical thinking, like, where am I at this moment in time? And I just called this person, asked her to look at the resume. I want to be on my game, send a clean email, make it crisp, make it look professional, and missing those nuances, whether in haste for whatever reason, indicate to me a lack of critical thinking that says this is a moment in time when I need to be respectful of the opportunity and maybe pay attention to some of these details. So at first glance, it's a lack of attention to detail, but for me, the deeper thought is it's a lack of critical thinking. And I think that's what we see when companies tell us they're seeing a lot of people come through the doors who are very good workers. But as we move very fast, and Susan's alluded to, it's a very fast time. Everything changes so rapidly. I have people work for me who don't want to change. After last year with COVID, can we please not have made changes this year? Well, I can't guarantee you that. I couldn't guarantee lack of changes last year nor future. So as we move rapidly, the people who are most comfortable and have agility in changing will succeed. But it's a critical gap to go from an instructional setting. I think that's where the influence is going to come, to go from an instructional setting to a work setting, because work settings are rarely instructional. They're not regular assignments. There's kind of a broad picture of what you're expected to do, and then you have to go figure it out a little bit. So that might be where some of the opportunity for academics to influence will come from.
Right. That's a great point. So, Susan, I guess, let's see. Yeah, so does that seem, from your review of things going on in higher education, is that pretty much also what you're hearing as well, is that employers are looking for these critical thinking skills, this discernment, the ability to work independently, I think, is really important too.
Yeah, it's very interesting when Cynthia and you and I had a conversation the other day, we noted how nuanced this idea of critical thinking is, right?
Mhm.
Like, we all think we're doing it, right? And we all know when somebody's not demonstrating it in a context that we're a part of with them, but it's hard to define exactly what it is we want. And so I think in part this is about improving relationships between employers and universities to really understand how to best prepare students for those circumstances. And I think it's preparing students for nebulous challenges, not multiple choice tests in which there's one clear answer, but really engaging students, whether in communities or internships or even classroom-based simulations that are nebulous and unclear, and letting them struggle a bit with the uncertainty of circumstances so that they become more independent in their thinking. I think that there is a culture in, I'll say, all of education, K-16 education, or maybe P-16 education, to look for the right answers. But maybe what we want to cultivate amongst students is some risk taking, some willingness to be wrong, and to figure out how, in trying one option, we learn what doesn't work and to move toward an alternative option, because there aren't always clear answers to the things we're asked to do in work settings, in life, in academia. There's not always clear answers. We could always go seek one more bit of information, one more research article on something, but in the end, decisions have to be made, actions have to be taken. And so what is enough information? What is the consequence of making a choice? I mean, if you're a heart surgeon, the consequence is quite different to try something out than it is if you're a student sitting in a 200 level, sociology course. But
Right.
even so, even in that context, we need to create space in which students act more autonomously and independently in preparation for what they're going to face when they go to work.
Yeah, I think what you both have said is really interesting, because as an educator, as someone in higher education and in the College of Arts and Sciences, I firmly believe that all of our faculty are interested in promoting critical thinking. I mean, that's one of our learning outcomes. Many classes promote and develop critical thinking skills among our students through their assignments and their pedagogy and things like that. And then, Cynthia, you're saying that employers are looking for the same thing, and that maybe part of the problem is that how nuanced and how I'll use a very untechnical term, how squishy that concept is, right? And so I guess maybe we can ask ourselves and use this as a point of discussion is how can we come together, or how could we engage in dialogue between higher education and industry and our community partners to really get a common understanding of what critical thinking is, because maybe it's not the same thing for both of us, or it's not articulated in a way that is that people can recognize on each side of the discussion.
Yeah, I think that's a key point, Roy. I think that we haven't had enough connections. We talk in higher ed sometimes about how siloed we are, and I think that, you know, as we think about our connection to the places where our graduates go, we don't have deep enough connections. We figure we do our job and then they move on. Except, as Cynthia says, no one's moving on. They're going to keep coming back. We need to be a more integrated system for doing this. I do think part of it is just thinking about what preparation looks like in an academic setting. It's not theory, it's theory to practice, right? It's always giving that practical application and testing out those theories and integrating different pieces of information. And I think a second piece of this that is really important is we don't often in higher education help our students communicate the skills that they have developed very effectively. So in the college, for example, those who come from the college will know, we've been focused on career competencies using the NACE career competencies framework, these 8 kind of competencies that employers tell us they want students to have. And they're the same things we've been talking about. They're oral and written communication, critical thinking and problem solving, teamwork and collaboration, information technology application, professionalism and having work ethics, career management and knowing where we're heading in careers and why we're pursuing particular things. As we work with our students to develop the kind of reflective learning, the metacognitive skills about how we learn, and as we help them talk about experiences they have as students as reflective of the development of these skills, I think employers are going to see more of what's actually occurring in our students and bring that table when they enter the workforce.
Susan, I think you've got so many good points. First, I have to go back to one from the last topic, which I just want to make sure that we tie up here, is that you reference allowing students to fail more. And that's a big part of the corporate setting, is that in a good company, and I believe this to be systemic, in a good company, failure is supported. And there are a lot of people, particularly, you know, some of them are my friends who graduated with their 4.0 intact and never got anything less than an A, and we're really proud of that. And that sense of failure is very frightening to them, and it makes them feel as if they're not doing well, as opposed to looking at each failure as a learning. So by embedding opportunities for students to fail into the curriculum, you're really helping them grow, and you are helping prepare them. Every one of the things you just named, the critical thinking, problem solving, the written, all of those are things employers are looking for, and you're producing, and employers are looking for. And I think that you and Roy both alluded to this, the connection, the miscommunication at times between academia and industry allows for there to be a gap, so that while you're producing people who really are good at teamwork, we talked about the first time, you know, my 21-year-old stepson said, I don't like to do these group projects because sometimes I put in more work than other people. We all get the same grade. And I'm like, yep, you're growing up. That's the way it is. You know, but learning that young and starting to apply that and understanding, not that it's a group project, but that it's a systemic learning tool and how you're going to be functioning the rest of your life. So learn to roll with it and do your best so that your other partners feed off of your personal drive for excellence. I think those things are important, that we understand, like, what does leadership look like in a corporation as opposed to in academia. So when you're producing a leader, I'm not sure that the leader, the term leader is always translated exactly the same from industry to academia and vice versa. And I think the biggest one is really I was looking through your list of all the things, thinking like problem solving. I know that the recent grads that I hire are usually delightful at problem solving because they ask why. And there was I once worked with a colleague who was very upset when, and you know, her referral was that when these millennials would ask her questions, but I realized the millennial in her mind was asking questions because he or she didn't want to waste either person's time. If they said, pull me a report on XYZ, these new grads would say, what's the purpose of the report? not to challenge authority, but to actually understand the purpose of the report. Because I can pull, as Roy said, there's information everywhere. I can pull you 1,000 reports and I can get that exact stripped down data. But if you're going to need if you need geographical coordinates with it, then I've got to pull it differently. I think there's more of that, and that can be perceived as resistance or cooperation, depending on how you're looking at it. So I think those are the conversations that we need to have across, like in this big arc. I talk with my hands a lot. I'm imagining this arc of academia and industry where we find these center points. But I think when you look at that, that's really where we need partnership, that there's an ongoing dialogue where employers understand what higher education actually does and what it takes to deliver that education, and academia actually understands what a day in the life of looks like in industry.
Yeah, I certainly think exploring ways for fruitful collaborations and discussions and, getting on the same page. But I want to pick up on something that both of you have talked about in bridging this link between higher education and industry, and maybe turn it the opposite way. Maybe part of the solution too is, how do we communicate to our students what we are trying to achieve, right? Your example of, oh, I hate group work, it just leads to free writing, maybe that's part of, we don't necessarily say, well, it helps you deal with free writing, but basically say, look, instead of just saying I had to do group work in my college career, you would, hopefully students, if we communicated in a compelling way, would say, yeah, I learned to be a leader. I learned how to work with others. I learned how to communicate my ideas through the different group work projects I had. Or I learned resiliency. I learned to learn from my mistakes and my errors through a iterative writing process in another class. So part of that communication, I think, really could also be, how do we communicate our students so that they then can communicate to future employers in a way that resonates with those future employers, as opposed to, yeah, well, I had to write a paper, I had to do a group assignment, I had to do this. No, there's deeper, more important things that you're getting out of that. Speaking of which, maybe we should go to the next slide and just sort of take a look at some of these skills that both Cynthia and Susan have been referencing in terms of critical thinking, and we see that critical thinking is on the rise, whereas on the bottom of this graph, and we've used these in the past because I think they are so important in both giving us a sense of what the fourth industrial revolution involves, but also too, what are the challenges? And what's on the decline in terms of what people need are physical abilities. So it's thinking, it's cognition, it's reflection, not being able to be on the assembly line, right? The next slide too looks at the top skills that the Future of Job survey from the World Economic Forum references. And again, we're looking at critical thinking and resilience, stress tolerance, flexibility, emotional intelligence. I think these are all things that we need to really look at. So in thinking about these, I guess my question would be, and in a way I don't want to repeat the same question, but I do think it's so important. Let me go back to one thing. One experience I had with this liberal learning. We had Luke Lloyd, who was the inventor of the dribble stick, which I hadn't heard about before, but it's interesting, right? And he actually his session was on learning from failure, and he made a comment to me in one of the pre-meetings and talking about the topic of, yeah, I'm just failing my way to success. And I thought to myself, that is so right on, because we don't want our students to be afraid of failure because they won't take risks. And I think that is so maybe the question is, how can we, I guess, break that mold or give people in some ways a different mindset about what learning is about. Learning is not about getting A's. learning is not just about being the top of your class. Learning is about being resilient and adaptable and accepting a failure, but learning from it. Not just saying, oh, I'm a failure, but rather, what can I take from that? What can I learn from that? How can I grow from that? I think that might be the challenge facing us. So, yeah, we don't want to have our graduates just go out and fail in the workforce, but we want them to learn through their experiences. So maybe Cynthia, you can talk from an employer perspective, and Susan can talk from a higher ed perspective of how do we sort of get some inroads on that mindset shift. And maybe that's a way of thinking about it.
When I talk about continual learning, I really do believe that everybody's going to be learning forever. I learn more now than I did when I was in my 20s. I mean, I podcast when I drive. I just listen to things. I learn. I absorb. I'm always learning, but I have to because I have a job that requires that I learn. And if I don't learn today, then I won't do well tomorrow. But I also know I do have permission to fail. And I think having permission to fail is a big part of why we learn. So if we look at it not as failure so much as the continual learning is trying, see how it works. As a matter of fact, ironically, I'm speaking to you today from, I'm en route somewhere. So I'm in Jackson. I'm sitting inside Lean Rocket Labs, which is an accelerator. And Lean Rocket Labs in Jackson is like any entrepreneurial kind of organization. 90% of the startups will fail. 90% fail. And yet when you look around at people I know who are business owners, theoretically they all failed 9 times before they run the business that I met them running, but they're doing it. So 90% of businesses fail, and yet people continually invest in business because we know that it's the ideas and the ideation, creativity that will drive us forward. So I think if we can take the context inside of learning and look at every work assignment as an opportunity, as a little miniature startup, that I'm going to go try it this way. And if it doesn't work, I'll try it another way. So I think that when you talk about continual learning, if you look at it as as exactly that, a true continuum where we expect to see you back because you do well enough in your job, you're going to continually be challenged with new things and the doors are open, and come back here and let us know what you need. Long term, I think the partnerships can be very, very close in terms of getting the right kinds of learning. We talked a little last week about, I call it just-in-time learning. Just-in-time delivery on parts for automotive is interesting and valuable, but we need to be careful to not, you can lose the liberal arts, the creative thinking, and the emotional intelligence. You can lose that if you're working. I always sit on this side, like I really see both sides. I see the academic side, the industry. Industry will sometimes say, Susan, we would love you to develop a curriculum for us that's 8 to 12 weeks long and it's going to teach this, and then we're done. Because that's the skill they think they need. But they need that skill embedded inside a person who's got critical thinking and discernment and all of these other qualities glued together. So we need to be careful we're not providing just-in-time training where we just solve a problem that's good for 3 months and then it's going to be a different problem. So I think that's where the value of, again, an analytical thought process to how we're delivering learning. So we're delivering what the employer needs, but we're guiding that employer as well on the fact that you're going to be back to us in a year because this person needs to have a broader set of skills. So you're going to deliver the content they want. And Roy, you'd mentioned anybody can be taught technology. That's really true. But you're going to deliver it along with, you're delivering it in the body of a person who knows how to think, challenge, second guess, question, analyze, and come back with a broad, forward-thinking answer. So I think, we need to be careful that we respond to industry, but also overlay it with our knowledge that we have knowledge about how people learn.
Yeah, when I think historically about what higher education has done, and I think back to a time, even in my childhood, when the encyclopedia sitting on the bookshelf, like in Roy's background, was the place you went to for information, and it wasn't at your fingertips. There was a lot more content that had to be delivered because that's where you got the information from. Today, it's a more equitable learning environment. Anyone who has access to the internet has access to enormous amounts of information. So there is this fundamental shift in what we're doing in higher education and in liberal education in particular, that is about making explicit the hidden curriculum that we have. So those are our gen ed learning outcomes, and making more explicit how it is we want to promote critical thinking, why we are doing those teamwork, team building kinds of opportunities, how we can create pedagogical experiences that are low stakes, where failure is not only encouraged, but almost expected at the outset, so that you can learn from those things to be persevering, to have the intuition and the motivation to keep going.
Right. So I'm going to shift gears here, and I think we've covered a lot of ground about the human skills. I think one book I've been reading refers to it as humanics, as opposed to technologies or some other things. But I want to return to the concept of entrepreneurialism, and you sort of mentioned it, Cynthia, in your last set of comments. So what do you think might be the essential skills that are needed to be a successful entrepreneur? And we talked about learning from failure and things like that. And I guess too is how do we infuse some of those insights about entrepreneurialism? Because as I said in my introduction, it seemed to me that everything that this guy was talking about in terms of entrepreneurialism seemed like liberal learning. So how can we sort of, again, maybe it's this how do we start speaking the same language with respect to entrepreneurialism and learning and continual growth?
I think a lot of, we did allude to it already, a lot of it does refer to being proud of failure, proud of attempts, proud of trying. And I look at that, I particularly notice that I travel back and forth to San Francisco a lot. And, when you get off a plane in San Francisco, you're confronted with all of these creative, there's a pride. And by the way, it's one of my least favorite airports, kind of a dingy airport, but there's this whole, it's a little bit like I'm from San Francisco and you're not, so it's really, there's an ego and an attachment to the culture that says we're people who get it done, we're creative. And yet here we do every bit as much, if not more, than Silicon Valley in terms of creativity, but we don't have the bravado. I have really wanted to make billboards that talk about how smart we are. I want people to get off a plane in Detroit and feel that swagger. That's what we're missing. We miss a little swagger. And I think that comes from a combination of creativity, which we have in spades. I think we've got tons of creativity here. But I feel like there are many reasons for it, but in Michigan, we lack fearlessness. And I think that's a critical component to being able to use that entrepreneurial skill set. And I think that liberal learning can enhance that fearlessness because it doesn't live inside the lines. Liberal learning takes you outside of the lines and allows you to actually be creative in your learning. So I guess if I could give one thing to this region and change how we looked at it, it would be to develop a stronger commitment to fearlessness, because that holds us back from the entrepreneurial mindset if we're afraid to try for fear of failure. And I when I say there's layers to it, I've kind of when I talk with my Silicon Valley colleagues, I've talked about it like this: like when this breaks, I stop by the Apple store and they say, "Oh yeah, we had a problem with that model. Let me get you a new one." And I said, "We make the thing. You take. We're best known in Michigan for making the thing. You take your baby home from the hospital in." So we can't be cavalier about mistakes. So as a cultural region, I believe we are deeply embedded in don't mess up, because bad things happen. So I think there's some, and we don't want to lose that. Yeah. That's why we're respected in aerospace and automotive and defense, and we love that. But there's somehow, you're a sociologist, you'll have to help me figure it out, somehow that layers into not being as fearless as we might need to be truly entrepreneurial.
Right.
I was thinking along a similar but related line, Cynthia. When I hear you talk about fearlessness, I think about Midwestern sensibilities, and there's something about just not being too out there, too too much bravado in what we do, too much self-promotion. And I think entrepreneurs have to be willing to just go for it, right? They have to say, here's my idea, and I'm not sure that it's going to work, but I'm going for it, and I'm going to give it my best shot and see what happens. And I think there's something about the cultures of the Midwest that lead to a little bit more conservatism in presentation and in willingness to experience those failures, and with good reason, as you point out. But I think that's where the entrepreneurialism intersects with these other forms of liberal learning, is just a willingness to go for it and to have a great idea and just make it happen through will and sheer effort and, you know, collaboration with others and trial and error.
I agree.
Well, so it's hard to believe, but we have about 5 minutes left here, according to my clock here. And so I want to, I guess, maybe close out our formal discussion, but I want to definitely preserve 30 minutes for questions and answers. So I'm going to say that take our last question or last comment to respond to is dealing with the magnitude of the changes faced or posed by the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and they're societal, they're technological, they're how do we as individuals respond to AI in every aspect of our lives. And given these profound transformations that are upon us, or that will be upon us shortly, I want to talk a little bit about the importance of multiple perspectives. One of the areas that I'm thinking about is the importance of diversity of perspectives, the importance of multidisciplinary. The college has really just gone through some restructuring that is intended to promote that interdisciplinary and multiple perspectives. So I guess I'd like to sort of close out with a discussion about how have you seen, Cynthia, multidisciplinarity playing itself out in industry, maybe Industry 4.0 even. And then Susan, maybe you can talk too about how can we within higher education really promote that, the importance and the fruits that we can yield from multidisciplinary work.
So we see multidisciplinary everywhere because manufacturing used to be manufacturing. It used to be bending metal. And now it's got a technology piece overlaid into it. People who never didn't consider themselves IT are now doing technology every day just in order to go to work. So I think that we're seeing that across the board, and there's a partnership. There's the academic industrial partnership that we really need to strengthen, because within any major corporation, big corporations, I see multidisciplinary being an issue even within that corporation. There are corporations where we only talk to the innovation director. There are other corporations where we only talk to the manufacturing director. And when we're most successful as an organization, we're talking with the innovation director, the IT executive, the manufacturing, the strategic planning, and all of those people. So I think that that interdisciplinary thing is a critical part for us as a small organization, for a university, and then for how each company interacts within itself. They have their own interdisciplinary challenges now, and I think that's where they're going to continually look to places like University of Michigan for a tether to how do we tie these pieces together, because they have the same problem that we all do, and it just, you know, you never know anybody else's problems till you know them pretty well. Once you get to know somebody well, they all have the same problems we do. But I think there's a way we can start to glue together our communication and true partnership, where Susan has a great relationship with a company down the street, and all of a sudden they're coming to her with ideas and she's helping problem solve, and she's sending them to the right professor for the right opportunity. And then they begin to look at you as their partner rather than a provider, because you're so much more.
From within the university, we certainly need to do everything Cynthia is talking about. We need to be engaged directly with some industries on an ongoing basis so that we become true partners to understanding what they're looking for and better at communicating what we're doing to try to prepare employees for that kind of work in the future. But when we think about our own structure, Roy, as you alluded to, you know, we've just restructured the college from 18 departments to 6 multidisciplinary departments. And you may say, structure, how's that going to really change anything? And structure has less impact on students directly than, say, the curriculum does. But the point of changing the structure is to allow interactions to be different, and for people who maybe previously didn't come together to think about the work that they're doing collectively. It's really no different than in industry in that regard. And so I'm hoping that these structural changes will accelerate curricular innovation in the college. I'm hoping that these structural changes will accelerate research innovations and research partnerships and community industry partnerships, frankly, that we need to have. When we have more diverse groups of people thinking together about how to solve problems, we're going to come up with the best solutions for the curricular sides of things. And we've seen examples of that. Our new programs in urban studies, in data analytics, pulling disciplines together and saying, let's look at this from multiple perspectives, actually helps students be better prepared for the questions that they're going to face in the world of work. So I think the combination of structure and curriculum inside the university will help us to move in this direction. I also think more real world learning, whether that's through internships, job shadowing, bringing students' own work experiences that they have. We know that most of our students are working anyway, into our classrooms as a piece of the learning, and the application of what we're trying to learn will all help us in that regard.
Yeah, well, just to highlight one initiative within the college that we've launched this winter and we'll be sort of putting into practice over the summer. We're creating these things called major maps, Cynthia, and what they are is how to infuse experiential learning throughout the 4 years of a degree program. Not just waiting until you're getting to the end and, oh my gosh, I need an internship, but rather how can you build in experiential learning throughout your degree and combine that with the importance of liberal arts learning and general education and all that kind of stuff. So I want to pause. I actually have other questions that we really didn't get a chance to touch on, but I wanted to just sort of pause and open it up to questions and really just sort of say, let's hear from you, what your questions are. If we run out of questions, I can ask my own, but I've already done that, so I've already had the floor. So let's hear from you all now.
And just a reminder to everybody, go ahead and just put those questions right in the chat, and we can ask them in order as they come. The first question here that we have is directly for Cynthia, and it asks, could Cynthia please flesh out what democratization of manufacturing means, and what are those implications for society?
I'm so glad you asked both parts of that question. So democratization of manufacturing is when you look at something as, and currently it's just one example, but with this 3D printer network, up until now, if you wanted to make 1 million widgets of any sort, you would need to have a factory with a lot of machines that make widgets. Now, a company that wants to make a part for an aerospace company simply lets us know their qualifications. We've got a blockchain running the back end of it. So all 300 printers are connected through a blockchain. A purchase order comes in and it gets distributed to people that are all have no more than one printer. So the entire network is built for small to mid-sized businesses so that a company doesn't have to invest millions of dollars in printers, in 3D printers, just to maybe get a purchase order from an aerospace company. Now for $25,000, and in the case of this particular example, we funded it, it was grant funded, so it's nobody paid anything for them right now. So now a small business for $25,000 can buy a 3D printer, hook it onto a network, let the network understand through the blockchain, which is going to be a governance body back and forth between all of the partners, let them know what their expertise is, what their strengths are, what they can make, what their productivity threshold is, and then they get to distribute that. So you all of a sudden have companies who never in a million years thought they could be a defense contractor, who can now be qualified to be a defense contractor, who never thought they could be manufacturing for Boeing, who are manufacturing a part for Boeing. So it's a chance to to democratize and kind of level the playing field. And I think we're going to see that over and over and over with Industry 4.0. Is one of the other examples I've always thought of is music. I remember thinking, oh, the musicians aren't making so much money. They used to make so much money and now they don't make, well, no, but a whole lot of people are now known as musicians. A lot of people who didn't have an opportunity before YouTube are suddenly famous musicians and have an opportunity to use their talent. So I think we're doing that with manufacturing now by democratizing, making it accessible for a lower entry point with less risk on the front and an opportunity to grow.
And just to connect that to a question for Susan, could you please talk more about how we can integrate the idea of failure and its benefits into classes? And how do we change the mindset of students on this important matter?
Well, I think first and foremost, we talk explicitly about it in the same way that we talk about why we do group projects, why team building is important, why we want them to be critical thinkers, and what are the examples of critical thinking that we want them to do. So as a starting point, I think it's about being explicit about failure, and that failure is an expected outcome. And it means something different than maybe you've been taught throughout your whole life or your K-12 education or other places in life, right? That's about the pedagogy, right? You don't put high stakes testing in place where 2 exams determine a student's grade, but rather you give a lot of project-based learning. And the first projects have very little weight toward your final grade because you learn from those experiences and can come up with better solutions as you move along, right? So it's everything from our grading systems to the kinds of assignments that we use. We help students to learn to critique one another's efforts. So people give us their very best effort and then they watch it be shot down. I mean, art is great at this. They critique art all the time in as a part of the curriculum, right? So why don't we have a critique of other people's ideas or projects happening in all of our disciplines, right? That's a way to learn that what you have is not the absolute best thing, that maybe it's not a complete failure, but that there are different ways of looking at it, and others' perspectives could actually help you improve what you're doing. So I think those are a couple of ideas about how we could address that. And it won't happen easily. I mean, we have to believe this ourselves. And this was a point I was going to make earlier, Roy, that I feel really strongly about saying, and that is, what we're asking our students to do to be prepared for Industry 4.0 or for the 4th Industrial Revolution, we have to acknowledge that we need to ask ourselves to do that too, right? That we as educators, we as higher education professionals have to be willing to try things that are going to fail. We have to be willing to take calculated risks, not crazy risks, right? You can get in on a lower scale, as Cynthia talks about, rather than high risk situations. But we have to hold a mirror up to ourselves and acknowledge the kinds of discomfort we have when we try new methodologies in teaching. That we have to say, this is new to me and I haven't done it before, and be real with our students to say, we're in this together and we're trying to figure out a new way to accomplish this work, and maybe give up some of the power and democratize to some degree the learning experience. I think these are critically important steps that maybe as an industry, if you want to think of higher education as an industry, we haven't spent enough time doing.
That's very insightful, Susan. Particularly the reference to art made me think about my own academic experience. I did not experience criticism, public criticism, for want of a critique, in academia, my 4 years of college. But the first time I hired a graphic designer who was an art major from University of Michigan, he was so wide open to criticism. And I asked him about it. He said, I'm an art major. Everything I do, I take and show it to a group of colleagues and peers, and they say, could be better, kind of like that. This is strong, this is weak, this needs to be improved. And I think that there is, you're right, that the model exists. It's been done in certain professions, but not in all areas. And I think if you could make that more systemic, that's really valuable, because then that also makes a very self-aware employee. They're very tuned into the fact that they have a lot to offer, but not everything. And they're not thin-skinned. They're easy to work with.
Yeah, and criticism, the word is in some way misleading, right? Or critique. But if it's seen as constructive criticism or valuable feedback for improvement. I mean, that's really what we should be, promoting and having our students seek it out, because, in academics, right, we send off our articles for peer review, right, and they come back and you look at them and you kind of go ooh, but you deal with it and you reflect and you get better papers. I mean, that is the purpose of critique and peer review. And so maybe that might be a way of thinking about our curriculum in light of that.
And we're talking so much about the academics, and I want to flip the other side too. Industry,
Yeah.
We work with industries all the time about their culture. If they're not culturally, if an industry is not culturally going to allow somebody to fail, and you send somebody who's willing to try failing there, they will fail there and it'll be bad. So we need to get industries. That's part of our commitment to the state of Michigan, is to make sure that we get industries prepared for Industry 4.0 in the way that they're culturally ready to allow more transparency. I know within our organization, we have a completely transparent communication system all the way up to the CEO, so that he sees what I say and I see what he says, and we weigh in on each other's thoughts. And that does occasionally create that discomfort you alluded to, Susan, where you look and think, ooh, I wish I hadn't said that. But you learn from that it's also not that big a deal. We're not as important as we think. And it's okay to hear that.
Yeah, I believe it's the previous slide. This leads me to an interesting observation. The previous one, I think, Nick. That one, yeah, about what we've learned from this national survey of employers. The bottom left corner, employers aren't the same. Views of higher education, perceptions of recent grads vary significantly by the employer's age and their own educational attainment. So part of that discernment that we've been talking about is to know what kind of a culture you're entering, whether it's an academic classroom culture, whether it is an industry culture. It's about figuring out what the unspoken rules are and how you work there, so that you don't, as a risk taker or someone who's willing to fail, go into one of those settings where it's not okay to fail. You find a good fit for yourself. I don't want to overstate the results of this study, but this is a study that's gone on every 2 years for a number of years that the Association of American Colleges and Universities have done. And this data was new this time. I think the breadth and depth requirements have always been there. Communication has always been there. The T-shaped professional has always been there. But the fact that there are employer differences, and as companies are different than they used to be, and that people don't stay in one industry for 50 years. I think we're going to see some differences in the workplace as well. One of those things that were noted is that younger employers, those employers under the age of 40, were much more interested in civic engagement and experiential learning from their prospective employees. So there's that kind of civic mindedness and a recognition that democratization and a recognition that cultural difference is an important thing to learn before you get on the job.
It's really
So,
fascinating.
Cynthia, I want to ask you too. That's in a way, it sort of ties in with Susan's questions about differences of employers, maybe by age. But how? I mean, I guess I'm curious just to how is Automation Alley trying to? I mean, it sounds like a big lift, right? Change the culture of industry in Southeast Michigan. I mean, that sounds, or in Michigan in general. I mean, that sounds like a huge task.
It actually is a huge task. So we're working hard at it. But one of the things we're doing, so we have a very detailed assessment, and the assessment that's done takes a lot of effort. So we're working with the governor's office with NASPA, the MEDC, to connect with 50% of all of our manufacturers and have them upskilled in Industry 4 within 5 years. So by 2025, we should have reached 6,000 of the 12,000 manufacturers. We can't do our full assessment for all of them because we don't have enough time, but we have a a small version of it, we're able to do with only 1 or 2 people. In the full assessment, if there's 300 employers or employees, they all need to participate. So it takes a long time to gain compliance just within a large corporation for that. But we find that even a short assessment of where they are today, what their readiness level is, and help them understand their willingness to accept risk, or like option-like bets. You know, what are you willing to try and roll the dice on? You're going to try something new and see how it works. So we work with them on a very short, quick pivot, turn it around, give it to them, and we hold we hold a mirror up to their face and say, okay, you're the CEO, and this is what you want to do. This is what you're doing today. Now, what can we do to move you down the road a little bit? And that's our first step with it. And then depending on where they are in that continuum, you know, we find that technology is the least important piece. The first thing is culture. They have to have a culture where they're willing to learn. The second piece is they have to have enough funding. So they need to make sure that after they look at their culture, that they find out where they can get the funding to then purchase whatever technology they need. But technology is clearly like a lagging indicator. It's a cultural willingness to change and desire to be progressive that is a foundational principle.
So Nick, do we have any more questions either coming up? I don't see any more in the chat. But
any questions? I would invite anybody that does have any additional questions or comments to go ahead and put those in the chat now while we have a few minutes here. And Ray, I don't know if you had an additional question.
I've got tons. I guess what I would say is, speaking of holding the mirror up to ourselves, one of the things that I'm gleaning from all this discussion of the fourth industrial revolution, AI, the need for constant learning, lifelong learning, that our students will be coming back to us. That's a good thing. I think higher education needs to change how we prepare students. And so maybe we can have a brief discussion about in a way, maybe our business model, right? Our business model has been a 4-year degree. It's been a master's degree, right? But I know that in higher education, there's discussions about certificates. There's about continual learning, that you non-candidate for degrees. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that space and think about where higher ed and industry can work together and really mutually benefit from these sorts of initiatives.
Absolutely. I think that the way of the future is, 65-year curriculum. However long you're going to be employed is going to be the time that you're at the university. And I think that we need maybe low bars for entry for people who aren't sure that a university education is for them, and that they may have already been in the workforce, or they may be coming right out of K-12 education, where you don't have to bite off a 4-year degree as your first point of entry. You might bite off a certificate that demonstrates a skill that is desirable and valuable in the workplace. So that could be professional communication, or it could be a particular certification for internet security. It could be a very specific kind of narrow skill. It could be social media influencing, or using social media in a particular way. So I think we need to create more opportunities at different levels. And then I think we need to work really hard as a field to think about transferability, because people are not static, and in a world that is increasingly interconnected, but people are moving around. Online delivery modes, creativity in transferring experiences, prior learning experiences into credit-bearing kinds of opportunities, competency-based assessments. All of these things need to be on the plate for what we consider. And so maybe now we're dipping our toes in with certificates or stackable certificates into master's degrees. And we are, as an institution. We need to be willing to jump in and try some things. And some of them are not going to work. And we have to acknowledge that it's okay that they're not going to work, right? That we're going to fail at some of the efforts that we undertake. But to stay exactly as we are, means we're not meeting our communities and industries needs, nor are we likely to be successful in the long run. So status quo is not an option.
That's, I love what you talk about with the lower point of entry too, because what's happened is up until now, I feel like we've sort of, so the universities of Michigan, the great schools of the world have seeded entry level opportunities to others. So if community colleges deliver a 2-year degree, or a tech school delivers a tech thing, then you've got people going that they get dead ended, not by their choice, but by the institution they went to. So they're dead ended, not because they chose to start out with becoming a social media influencer, but they went to social media influencing school and then they were done and they don't know what to do from there. So if you can provide those entry points, I think that's an exciting way to get people who might be intimidated by University of Michigan to kind of try that one semester or that one thread and get that first credential. And then they kind of get that feeling that I think I could do more. And I think that's how they become a lifelong learner. They go somewhere where lifelong learning is the plan. I like that.
And for places like a College of Arts and Sciences, which is infused with some professional training as well. We have engineering and computer science in our programs, but for places that are liberal arts and sciences, like, be proud and own that liberal learning that we're delivering and be able to articulate it as a valuable skill set in the marketplace. Rather than, shirk back from it or say, there's not much demand for it. We have to explain why those folks who are trying different things or are at a crossroads in their careers should choose these sorts of experiences to enhance and broaden their opportunities.
Well, and I think I shared with you and Roy privately that I have done everything from technology to 20 years in nonprofit to working where I am today. And that's been because I always say I'm professionally trained to think. I was an English major. I'm a liberal arts, I'm a big fan of the liberal arts, but I'm an English major. And I feel like I learned how to think and how to analyze and how to assess and make discernments. And I learned it young, and I have been able to pivot that skill. But I think that's one of the dynamic things you offer that really is, I feel like we're going to be moving away from these tightly tailored careers into little tailored experiences within a big opportunity, because I think people's careers are going to change so many times over their lifetime. We don't even know how many times they're going to change now.
And it's almost like it's a learning ecosystem. It's the experiential, it's the things that are currently outside of higher education that will become a part of the way that we recognize credentials. It's the full 4-year degree programs. It's the certificates that are stacked to give different kinds of learning experiences. We need to think about a learning ecosystem rather than 4-year degrees, and that's it. I did want to mention one last thing that you had raised, Cynthia, that I think is an interesting point. And I'm intrigued, this idea of like exchanges, spending a day in the life of an industry professional, or having industry professionals in our classrooms, or helping us to design learning experiences and real world projects that students can chew on. You said the relationship between employer and employee is different than between student and faculty. And I wondered if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yes, well, one of the things that we talked about is I find that people don't always understand that when you're faculty, the student is your customer. When you're an employer, the employee is beholden to you. It's a completely inverted relationship. So the employer-employee relationship is one where there is a power structure, where the academic relationship does not have that same power structure. So it's got a very inverted power structure. So I think when people move in and out of that, it's important to understand the opposite way of thinking. And I talked to a college basketball coach who was once being approached by the NBA, and I said, why would you do that? Like, these people put you on a pedestal because they're students and you are their basketball coach. And when you go to the NBA, you're just the guy in the way between them and all their money. So I think that there's that relationship that we have. The employer-employee relationship is hierarchical, and the academic is a stronger equal relationship where although the academic instructor is the lead, he or she is infusing you with opportunity, but learning back from you. And I think that transitioning, the employers don't always recognize how to do that. So particularly early on in somebody's career, when they come out of essentially a nurturing give and take environment from academia and go into the corporate world, it's very different, because there are some corporate people who really don't care anything about how you feel. They just want to move on and get things done. So I think there's a transition. I would love to see, people from academics spend a day in the life of an industry, and industry spend a day in the life of finding out what it takes to actually teach people what they need to learn, and have that relationship, that very different relationship that you have with them in the academic setting. So I don't know. I'd like to pursue that in the more.
I hope we will continue that conversation, and I hope some of the folks that are part of our seminar today are interested in doing that and would like to volunteer to do that, and we'll work to try to make some of that happen and see what we can learn from those experiences.
It would be wonderful.
I just want to, this partnership we've been talking about different ways of creating partnerships. And I think this is a really important and has a lot of potential in terms of creating a partnership. And so let's hope we can continue this conversation. I guess I just want to say that I think if we're going to, we talked about meeting the needs of employers and meeting the needs of, and survival, not survival, but having higher education really thrive depends on having a model that's different than our four-year degree. I think it's vitally important for our students, and our students, not just our current students, but our future students and the students that will be coming back to us. Because if we can provide them with the learning they need, not just in time, as you mentioned, Cynthia, but rather a model of learning that says, we will be here for you. We are plugged in so that we know we are trying our best to keep on top of things. And we will have things here that you will need, or we'll help you find things that you need. If we can develop that relationship, and maybe one thing to close on too is just, I think where we are going to be successful, and this is in this Robot Proof and Higher Education book, is that humans excel and are uniquely positioned to foster relationships. And so the relationship with our students, the relationship with our potential employers, the relationships among students and faculty and all that, but it's also a relationship to learning. And how do we, as an institution of higher education, be one of an ecosystem of education, as Susan put it? And I think that really figuring that out together, not in silos, higher education versus private industry and nonprofits and all that world, but rather figuring that out in partnership is really going to be key.
I agree, and I'm looking forward to more opportunities for all of the college and across the college to be engaged with our partners.
I am too. This has been delightful. Very, very informative.
And I just want to thank both of you too for a great conversation. There are seeds that came up in this conversation that I hope we can plant and nurture and turn into something, because this is the future, and this is where we need to work together for the sake of our students, really. Now and for 65 years, as you said, Susan, we'll have them coming back for 65 years. And so I think that's great. So anyway, Cynthia, safe travels. Thank you so much for taking the time. Literally, you literally pulled off the road and did this. Susan, thank you so much for your participation. Yeah, I noticed something.
Yeah, it's
and Susan, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, and Susan, thank you. I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day. But this has been very enjoyable from my perspective, and so certainly I thank you. And Nick couldn't have done it without your technical support and your behind the scenes working. And I want to thank Paula and her organization for their support for what, 4 years now. And I'm already thinking about LLE 5.0. So I guess everybody stay tuned. Thank you.
Sounds great. Thank you, Roy.
Bye now.
Everybody.
Bye-bye.